Welcome to Think Big with Michael Zellner podcast, powered by Sleepy Z's Masonry. My guest today for episode 150 for part 3 of this podcast interview is Richard Gage, AIA. Richard Gage, AIA is an architect of 30 years from the San Francisco Bay Area. He's a member of the American Institute of Architects and the founder and former CEO of Architects and Engineers for 9/11 Truth. He, along with his courageous wife and assistant, Gail, continues to lead the charge toward the real investigation into the destruction of all 3 World Trade Center skyscrapers on 9/11 at richardgage911.org. Mr. Gage became interested in researching the destruction of the World Trade Center high-rises shortly after hearing the conclusions of a reluctant 9/11 researcher, David Ray Griffin, on the radio back in 2006. Which launched his own unyielding quest for the truth about 9/11. The organization he founded, AE 9/11 Truth, now numbers more than 3,500 architects and engineers in demanding a new investigation into the destruction of all 3 World Trade Center high-rise buildings on 9/11. As an architect, he has worked on most types of building construction, including numerous fireproof steel frame buildings. Most recently, he worked on the construction documents for a $400 million mixed-use urban project with 1.2 million square feet of retail parking structure and mid-rise office space, altogether about 1,200 tons of steel framing. Richard, thanks again for joining me today.
Well, thank you, Michael. It's great to be here for part number 3 of our series here.
Absolutely. Thank you again. And before we get started today, I would like to thank our 2 new sponsors of Think Big with Michael Zellner, Roof and Nail and Buckley's Grill. Roof and Nail is one of the leading experts in insurance restoration. Co-owner Kelly Potter and his crews are preferred vendors of many mainstream insurance companies focused on the tri-state areas of Arkansas, Mississippi, and Tennessee. Not only can Roof and Nail provide you with the best evaluation on your roof to see if you qualify for insurance approval, but they can also provide you with a competitive bid for any out-of-pocket roofing projects. It doesn't matter if the job is big or small, they do them all. And Buckley's Grill is a hidden gem for those seeking a fantastic experience in Memphis. Local owners Jeff Furinelli and Ken Dick have been specializing in steaks and Southern hospitality for over 30 years. It's an upscale restaurant, boasts a contemporary atmosphere with a touch of classic elegance. And from the moment you step inside the restaurant, you're greeted by friendly faces. The wait staff there is amazing and warm hospitality, and they make you feel right at home. You know, for those that maybe have not seen parts 1 and 2, in part 1 and 2, Richard did a presentation talking about World Trade Center building number 7 that quote unquote collapsed about 8 hours after the Twin Towers were hit by the airplanes. And he went into a little detail about the Twin Towers in part 2. Today, he's come back on the show for part 3 to give us a little quick overview of Building 7 and then do a full presentation of the Twin Towers and what happened on September 11th, 2001, not just from his perspective, but from several thousand architects that agree with him, and also from a lot of first responders and people that were there on the ground that day. If you rarely or never open up your mind for things that maybe not have been what you thought they were or what you've been told for the last 22 plus years, I hope you watch this today and judge for yourself. And Richard, I am going to turn things over to you here because I know you have a great presentation and presentation for everyone to see today. So I'll let you take it from here.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Awesome. Let's do this. I did not want anybody to be the last to know about 9/11. That's what I felt like I was in 2006. There were no architects and engineers organized to present the evidence at the World Trade Center of the explosive demolition of these 3 high rises. Nobody from the technical community or in an organized fashion. And so it kind of fell on my lap. So I figured out, how to do a PowerPoint presentation and how to talk in front of people. We've now given over 700 presentations around the world in 24 countries.
Wow.
and an equal number of radio interviews. So it's incumbent upon those of you who are hearing this information and resonating with it to do something about it and share this. So your friends, family, colleagues, media representatives, elected representatives are not the last to know either. We looked at Building 7 last week. We found out that nobody last week, the last time, on part 2 of this series, Michael, and we found it was a 47-story skyscraper that collapsed straight down uniformly, symmetrically into its own footprint, exactly like this. And we've seen this before, like in the old hotels in Las Vegas. It is obviously a controlled demolition, and that's what the forensic evidence shows. We talked about the official story saying it was due primarily to office fires, and we saw those office fires, that they're few, they're small, and they're scattered. Real office fires in real high rises do not bring high rises down before or after 9/11. We found out a whole bunch of things about this building. One, that it would take all of the columns to be destroyed at once, instantly. The interior followed a second later by the exterior columns. We found that these fires could not do that. We also looked deeply into the evidence of explosive demolition in terms of the eyewitness accounts, many eyewitnesses of explosions prior to the building coming down. We looked at other experts, and we found that the University of Alaska Fairbanks did a detailed study that pulled the rug out from underneath the official NIST report. NIST is the National Institute of Standards and Technologies, who was tasked by Congress to explain these collapses to the American people. And on the right, they have their official computer model, which they said proves how the building came down. And we saw that it did anything but that. So one of the top forensic structural engineers in the country, Professor Leroy Hulsey of the University of Alaska, found in this study that fire did not cause the collapse of this building, and that did not experience a progressive collapse as claimed by NIST, but a global collapse caused by the near simultaneous failure of all of its columns. Well, what can do that? We looked at some of the things that can do that from FEMA, this metallurgical examination that they included in their 2002 report. They found the evidence of ignited thermite. They didn't call it that, but we found that it could only be that, capable of turning a solid steel girder into Swiss cheese. We found that steel members in the debris pile have been partly evaporated, according to Jonathan Barnett, the author of that report. And it's exactly what others, experts, structural engineers, have found. The melting of girders at the World Trade Center. We found extreme temperatures exceeding 2,500 degrees that have no narrative in the official explanation, no possible cause in the official explanation. I mean, we found that there's evidence of ignited incendiaries in the dust as well, as produced by the U.S. Geological Survey. In 2005, they did studies and found billions of previously molten iron microspheres. We found that they did not have an explanation for why they were molten, why they were iron, or why they were spherical, all of which is evidence of incendiaries, particularly thermite, an incendiary used by the military to cut through steel like a hot knife through butter. We found that there's up to 4 tons of this evidence of ignited thermite in the World Trade Center dust. If I'm going too fast, I want you to know that you can see this entire presentation in part 2 of this series that Michael will link to in his posting of part 3. The EPA even calling it, gosh, this is a signature component of the World Trade Center dust, but we don't know what these previously molten iron microspheres are or where they came from. Well, we found that through experiment, the arbiter of competing hypotheses, that we can determine exactly where they came from. They came from thermite, and thermite releases molten iron microspheres as its byproduct, one of the byproducts. Why? Because surface tension forms aerosolized liquids into spheres, and they cool and they fall, and that's what explains the toasting of the tops of these cars. But was there any evidence of an unignited thermite? We found that there was. A team of 8 international scientists led by Niels Harrit in Copenhagen examined 7 independently collected samples of dust that were sent to them, and they find, gosh, this is not paint. This is attracted by a magnet. They do a detailed study of the red layer, and they find the ingredients of thermite. So what's that doing there? They zoom in 50,000 times more, and they find nano-sized particles of iron oxide crystals and aluminum platelets in the chips, and they're set in a bed of oxygen, silica, carbon, organic material, which is responsible for the expansion of gas, which causes things to be knocked over by TNT, for instance. So this is an incendiary that appears to have been engineered to become more explosive. We looked at the peer-reviewed study and found that this has been engineered before by Los Alamos lab, and we found that these chips react exactly the same in a differential scanning calorimeter, producing exothermic reactions at about 800 degrees. Now, they're getting real curious now. In the heater, these chips ignite. We found that they produce what when they ignite? Molten iron microspheres with the same exact chemical signature as the molten iron microspheres found in the World Trade Center dust by the U.S. Geological Survey. So we get pretty darn confirmation that this is very high-tech material, not made in a cave in Afghanistan. And so that peer-reviewed paper concludes that the red layer is unreacted thermitic material incorporating nanotechnology. It's a highly energetic pyrotechnic or explosive material. So that's when we invited everybody to help us get this evidence, all of it, into the film 9/11 Crime Scene to Courtroom. And you can co-produce this film. We're going to jump into the Twin Towers now and go a little bit slower. That was your 5-minute overview of the evidence for World Trade Center 7 and the extreme heat, which applies directly to the Twin Towers, because all of that was throughout all of the dust and in the aftermath and the pools of molten iron under the Twin Towers. And so let's just slow down and take a look at the destruction of the North and the South Tower. The North Tower on the right, the South Tower on the left. Is there any similarity? They look exactly the same, as a matter of fact, and with upward, outward, arching streamers, a geometry of fireworks, freely flying structural steel sections weighing 4 and 8 tons ejected laterally, trailed by thick white smoke clouds. Now, we're going to go into all of this, but I wanted you to see it up front clearly at the same time. Why are they identical? Even though we have asymmetrical damage from the planes, asymmetrical damage from the fires, we have complete symmetrical damage all the way down. So this gives you a preview of where we're heading today. Let's look at the features of controlled demolition as applied to the Twin Towers and see. We'll walk through them just like we did in part 2 with Building 7. Beginning with, is there a sudden onset of destruction? And where is that? At the point of the plane impacts. In the case of the Twin Towers and Building 7, it was down low, as in a typical controlled demolition. So what we see is the building is still, and all of a sudden it's in uniform downward motion. And no jolt, no hesitation at the impact when the cold, hard steel below the point of plane impact is met by this ascending object. We'll break that down even further. Let's look first at the South Tower. It's still at rest, and all of a sudden it's in uniform downward motion. Again, no jolt, no hesitation when the when the body below it, the rigid body below it, would be expected to provide some resistance. So NIST, again, the National Institute of Standards and Technology, tells us that this upper part above the point of plane impacts drove the rest of the building down to the ground and then destroyed itself. This is called the crush down, crush up theory by Zdeněk Bezant of Chicago, in Chicago, the Northwestern University. I'm going to turn that down. And they don't mention Newton's third law of motion, which says that there's an equal and opposite destructive force when two bodies collide. We'll jump into that. But first, realize that this mathematical wizard from Northwestern University has submitted a extremely complex paper that took engineers 10 years to decode. Tony Zamboti, Richard Johns, and others finally decoded it, and it was this paper was submitted just 2 days after 9/11. Now the rest of us were in shock, wondering when the next plane was coming, when the next attack, who did this, who's responsible for this, what's going on. Well, this guy's in his den working out the theoretical basis for what became the official narrative, the crush down, crush up theory, but it totally ignores, as I mentioned, the third law of motion, which says there's an equal and opposite destructive force when two bodies meet. The upper part is the lightest. It gets heavier and heavier and heavier as you go down. Say when a Volkswagen meets a Mack truck, what happens? The Volkswagen gets destroyed, right? Does it matter if we drop the Volkswagen onto the Mack truck? No, the Volkswagen is not going to destroy the Mack truck. The lightest and weakest part of a structure cannot possibly destroy the cold, hard, heavier, intact steel below it, especially at near free fall acceleration, which we'll get into. Why can't it do that? Because the lightest steel is at the top. In fact, it's heavier and heavier and heavier and bigger and bigger and heavier all the way down. At midpoint, it's 36 inches by 22 inches and 2 inches thick steel. But it gets heavier and heavier and heavier as we go down until at the bottom, it's almost solid steel, 52 inches by 22 inches. So this is not going to be crushed by the Volkswagen at the top. In fact, let's look at the destruction of the building. Is the top destroying the bottom part? Let me make it easier for you. Watch the bottom red line. It doesn't go down in measure with the descending green line, the top of the building. No, it's telescoping in on itself. It's being destroyed in the first couple, 3 seconds by what? We'll come to that. But we can clearly see that the top part is not, in fact, driving the rest of the building down to the ground. It looks more like a massive explosion, the volcanic eruption in the Tongan Sea after the first 3 seconds. In fact, let's just make a note of that. And we will include one more slide for you, which makes that abundantly clear. Upward, outward, arching streamers. Again, a geometry of fireworks, freely flying, solid, molten objects trailed by thick white smoke clouds. And none of the photos and none of the videos show a top part descending down to the ground and or driving the rest of the building down to the ground. If it was, it would have crushed These few remaining core columns, which stand for about 6 seconds after the Twin Towers have come down 1,000 feet in the air, and then an explosion underneath apparently destroys its base, and it descends frame by frame through the powdered concrete, which is everywhere. We'll come back to that too. See, it is descending frame by frame. So some people say it's turning to dust. It's not that. So the crush down, crush up theory fails miserably for this reason as well. It ignores that steel spire that survived, which would have been crushed by that top portion. But no, it's an outward set of explosions, as we've seen, which is blowing up around that set of core columns that survives. Well, what's doing that? We have to look at some of the witnesses here. In fact, let's look at the oral histories of the first responders, 186 of them now, dug up from the 12,000 pages of testimony by the late, great Professor Graham McQueen, 9/11 researcher, who found some key quotes, 186 of them. Here's just a few of them. We felt the ground shake. We could see the towers sway, and then it just came down. So again and again, we're going to hear a repeating set of the order of experiences of these first responders. They're seeing, they're feeling, they're hearing this phenomena of explosions before the tower comes down. All of a sudden, the ground just started shaking. It felt like a train running under my feet. The next thing we know, we look up and the tower is collapsing. It shook my bones. Shortly before the first tower came down, I remember feeling the ground shaking. I heard a terrible noise, and then debris just started flying everywhere. I saw a flash, flash, flash at the lower level of the building. You know, like when they demolish a building, with each popping sound, initially an orange, and then a red flash came out of the building. And then it would just go all around the building on both sides. Saw a number of brief light sources being emitted from inside the building between floors 10 and 15. He saw about 6 of these brief flashes, accompanied by a crackling sound before the tower collapsed. I saw low-level flashes. I saw flash, 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 and then it looked like the building came down. You ever see professional demolition where they set those charges on certain floors and you hear a pop, pop, pop? That's when I heard that friggin' noise. That's when I saw the building coming down. An explosion appeared at the very top simultaneously from all 4 sides. Materials shot out horizontally. And then there seemed to be a momentary delay before you could see the beginning of the collapse. How specific do they need to be? It's very clear what's going on here. There was an explosion in the South Tower, one floor under another. When it hit about the 5th floor, I figured it was a bomb because it looked like a deliberate, synchronized kind of thing. It seemed like on television when they blow up these buildings, it seemed like going all the way around like a belt. All these explosions. The building was blowing out on all 4 sides. You actually heard the pops. You know, you heard the pops of the building. I thought the terrorists planted explosives somewhere in the building. That's how loud it was, a crackling explosive. Another loud boom at the upper floors, and then a series of smaller explosions, which appeared to go completely around the building at the upper floors. And another loud earth-shattering blast with a large fireball that blew out more debris. The lower level of the building, you know, like when they demolish a building, that's what I thought I saw. Did you see any flashes? I said, yes. Well, I thought it was just me. He said, no, I saw them too. Everybody, I think, at this point still thought these things were blown up. So I was fully expecting anything else to blow up. You were there when the planes hit? No, I was there when the building exploded. Gee whiz. Sorry.
It's okay.
No, I was there when the building exploded. You mean when it fell down? No, when it exploded. Leading the witness there. Is there a straight down symmetrical progression outside the footprint? Well, let's look at Tower 2, the South Tower. It begins to fall over, actually. It's falling at 22 degrees. So we have asymmetrical loading on the building below and falling off the building. We have asymmetrical damage from the airplanes. We have asymmetrical damage from the fires. How in the world do we get complete symmetrical destruction all the way around all four faces of the building? It makes no sense. In fact, if we zoom in on the leading corner of this building and these explosions, we can see them, about a dozen of them in this looped video, floor by floor, descending down the building. This is not nuclear weapons, as is posed by some. It's not directed energy weapons, as proposed by others. It is individual explosions, which must have been preset, of course, in the building. Well, let's look at some of these isolated explosive ejections called squibs in the controlled demolition industry. There, 20 stories down below, 40 stories down below the zone of destruction, and even 60 stories down below the zone of destruction, completely unaccountable for in the official narrative. Pre-detonations, whatever they are. In the South Tower, we can see a dozen of them on the left side of the building exploding out in these individual explosions, which is doing what? It's essentially liquefying the structure so that it doesn't act as a rigid body and continue to fall to the right off the building as it had started to do, but settles back down on top of the pile. So yeah, we have to ask ourselves, what are we really seeing here and what's causing it? Well, what's causing it are explosions, as we've seen. How fast is that top part of the building coming down? David Chandler, physics teacher, identifies that it's 64% of acceleration of gravity, which is 2/3 of free fall acceleration, which means it's coming down almost as at the rate of a bowling ball falling out of the sky. It's not slowing down when it meets what? The cold, hard steel below it, not even slowing it down. So something has to be removing that steel. And there's an awful lot of that steel in these 47 massive core columns and 240 steel perimeter columns. So let's see what happens to them as we look at the lateral ejection of these perimeter columns in particular, impaling themselves all around the World Trade Center site, in skyscrapers all around it, ejected 500 feet away and 600 feet away, destroying the World Financial Center winter gardens. So we can see them in these freely flying structural steel sections weighing 4 and 8 tons ejected laterally, like this one that's about to hit World Trade Center 7. Back 2, forward 2, back 2. It starts out horizontal. How does gravity work again? Down. What's going on here? Out. Very far out, where it hits World Trade Center 7 and beyond. World Trade Center 7 is not even as far as many of these went. So then gravity begins to take over and it starts to fall at a 45-degree angle. So what's causing this? It's enough force to send a 200-pound cannonball 3 miles, and there's thousands of them. Well, probably 1,000 of them. If those steel framing sections and the core columns as well, most of them are sent outside the footprint of the building, we have to ask ourselves the question, what's crushing the building? Well, goodness. Maybe it's the concrete, because the concrete's very heavy too. We'll come to that. But look, the perimeter of distribution is 1,200 feet in every direction. The tower is only 200 feet wide. So can you really call this a gravitational collapse, or is something else going on here? Again, on the left side, destroying the Winter Gardens and the World Financial Center 500 and 600 feet away. Let's look at the concrete, because we are looking for 110 concrete floors, 4 and 8 inches thick, each an acre in size. We don't see them, though. We don't see 50 of them stacked up. We don't see 20 of them. We don't see 10. We don't even see one. They were poured concrete on metal decking over lightweight steel joists. Where are they? On the right, in Mexico, we have a real gravitational collapse. We see pancakes. On the left, only a miscellaneous pile of core columns, perimeter columns. Where is all the concrete? It's missing. Oh, here it is. Pulverized in midair. 90,000 tons of concrete, pulverized to a fine 100 micron average size of particles, like baby powder, actually. Very interesting. And distributed over lower Manhattan in a 3 square mile area in this blanket of dust 3 inches thick. Well, wait a minute. If 90,000 tons of concrete is pulverized and spread over 3 square miles, what's crushing the building? It wasn't the steel. It's not the concrete. This is more than 3/4 of the weight of the building, which was used in Zdeněk Bazant's theory to crush the building. His mathematical calculations included not only the weight of the concrete and the steel, but he doubled the mass up above in this fraudulent effort to try to show that the crush down, crush up theory. And he reduced the column strength below by more than 3 times in order to get it to fall. He rigged it in favor of a collapse. So this is being challenged. But the evidence might show us what happened. Easily the largest and most perplexing structural failures in history. 400 truckloads a day were lined up, ready to remove this debris within 2 weeks after 9/11 and shipped to China for recycling. Sorry. This is the illegal destruction of evidence in a crime scene, prompting Bill Manning, editor-in-chief of Fire Engineering magazine, to cry out, "Crucial evidence that can answer many questions is on the slow boat to China, showing an astounding ignorance of government officials to the value of a thorough scientific investigation. The destruction and removal of evidence must stop immediately." But it didn't. And this is why we have, in fact, so many architects and engineers demanding a new investigation with all of the 10 key characteristic features of controlled demolition and some very uncharacteristic features as well. This becomes direct evidence of destruction with explosives. Fire can't account for any one of these features, let alone all of them, which we have in the Twin Towers. With additional circumstantial corroborative evidence and testimony, we find this to be proof of controlled demolition. A body of proof, again, that has convinced thousands of architects and engineers to sign on to the petition demanding a new investigation. You can see their names at richardgage911.org. You can find the evidence itself in much more detail and backed up by 40 high-rise architects, structural engineers, metallurgists, chemists, physicists, controlled demolition experts, all laying out the evidence for the explosive demolition of all three towers. On the left, 9/11 explosive evidence experts speak out. That one's available on our website, richardgage911.org. You can buy the DVD or you can watch it for free. And the building 7 was documented by Professor Leroy Hulsey of University of Alaska in Fairbanks in their 4-year study, which is documented here in this DVD made by Dylan Avery. And we have a 15-minute mini documentary narrated by actor Ed Asner just on Building 7. So these are all available on the website. You can watch them. So I have teamed up with litigation director for the Lawyers Committee for 9/11 Inquiry, Mick Harrison, and I were filmed in Washington, D.C., laying out all of this evidence. And we've filmed over 24 experts in their fields as well to bring up to date the most comprehensive body of evidence ever assembled in the 9/11 truth movement, a film which is already filmed, but now in editing. And it's a substantial effort, and we would invite you, all of you, to support us in this effort at richardgage911.org and co-produce the film with us. It's a film series, actually, 20 individual episodes, each on a separate aspect of the evidence, so that you can actually, you get in an argument with somebody, you can send them part 16, the evidence of nanothermite incendiaries in the World Trade Center dust. So become a part of this extraordinary and historic effort, because the truth about 9/11 is dark, and it's not just about buildings that have been blown up, and it's not just about as tragic and catastrophic and horrific as it is 3,000 people murdered in cold blood. It's much darker than that, involving the invasion of two countries in which 2 million people have perished, the reordering of the Middle East, the invasions of Afghanistan and Iraq. And we are engaged now in a $6.5 trillion global war on terror, which has and will indebt our great-grandchildren. This can't ever really be paid for. It's part of the $33 trillion debt, which can't ever be paid for and which is currently bankrupting our country. It happens as a result of the efforts by deep state operatives in incredible positions of control over our government, over our military, over the media, which is a second arm of the military, to push wars of aggression. And who benefits the most from all of these things? The arms industry, the oil industry, the banking industry, the insurance industry, the media. So we've got massive censorship of the truth, which has been put out there by hundreds and hundreds of spokespersons for the 9/11 truth movement, which is millions strong. And yet we haven't broken through to the majority of the public, even though we have the internet, even though people like Tucker Carlson and Joe Rogan, who have more viewership, greater viewership than the CNN, are toying with the idea of Building 7 being a problem, but won't put the actual evidence that you've seen today and in part 2 and in part 1 of this series. So we've got to put pressure on those reluctant leaders in the alternative media as well, and wake them up. And of course, mainstream media eventually. We've got to put pressure on our elected representatives, to whom we've given many copies of the different DVDs, 536 altogether over the course of 18 years now, at least 7 times, and including the coffee table booklet Beyond Misinformation, produced by AE 9/11 Truth, and the petition with all the names on it, all 3,600 names given to each member of Congress. Can't get any responses other than a few superficial, ineffective ones at that. So we've got our work cut out for us. You know, where do we draw our line in the sand? I mean, where do you personally draw your line in the sand? I knew the buck stops here in 2006 when I heard David Ray Griffin talking about most of this evidence. I said, oh my God, we've been had. This is the biggest scam of the century, short of COVID, which I didn't know about, of course, back in 2006. Do we wait for the next 9/11? Well, it's already here, not only with COVID and the false solution to that false engineered problem, but in the Middle East, where we have the invasion and the genocide of Gaza in another false flag operation, the subject of the article I'll be posting next week. No, speak the truth about 9/11. It's the domino that knocks over the other dominoes so that the American people can finally be woken up. Well, here, let's look at it like this. We all say, I've said it myself, I'm small, what can I do? Well, okay, I started speaking, but I can't speak to everybody. But if you and I are this tiny little 3 millimeter high domino, look what can happen, even if each domino is 1.5 times taller than the next.
Boom. That was 13 dominoes. If I had 29 dominoes, the last domino would be as tall as the Empire State Building.
And that is the deep state that we must expose. How do we do it? By talking to 2 more people. We're talking to more than 2 people right now, right, Mike?
Yes, sir.
A lot of people. And so if each of you send this set of 3 podcasts to your friends, 2 of them, and ask them to send it to 2 of them, and so on, we can get the investigation that we need and the exposure that we need. And your friends won't be the last to know. They won't say to you, why didn't you tell me? No, get the truth out now. Share this with everybody. Our country's at stake, and it may already be too late.
You know, when I think about this, how, in your opinion, and the opinion of many architects, you know, obviously 3,500 or so architects, when we talk about the deep state, and that those words to a lot of people, they maybe don't really want to believe it. You know, it's really hard when you think about that. And, And I'm sure you understand that there's people out there that are skeptical that say, how could our government do something like this to us? Well, over the last many, many years, there's been so many things like false flags that we've talked about before. How far up the chain do you believe this went, as far as, in your opinion, who knew about it? And why do you believe, I know you covered this obviously in a little bit, why do you believe that this happened, in your opinion?
Well, there are many researchers in the 9/11 truth movement and many, many, many books that have been written, and they discuss these things in detail. One of the most prolific authors, having written 14 books, is the late, great David Ray Griffin, who exposed the involvement of many in the Bush administration, many all the way up to the top in the Pentagon, and also involvement of 9/11 commissioners, all of which had conflicts of interest. Kevin Ryan is also quite prolific in his exposure of those responsible, particularly in a book he wrote called Another 19 Suspects, other than the fundamentalist Muslims who, in all likelihood, had no access to the Twin Towers and Building 7, three of the most highly secure buildings outside the Pentagon. So who had access to place explosives in the Twin Towers? Who ran the security for the Twin Towers? Well, it happened to be Securicom, Stratosec, which have members of the Bush family in their board of directors. So they need to be investigated at least, right? Once you accept the hypothesis and confirm the theory, as we have today, that these towers were blown up with explosives, they had to have gotten into the buildings to be able to do this. So security has to be involved. I mean, again, we're not talking about people sneaking into the building and performing the largest controlled demolition set, 3 of them in the world. We have, in fact, the elevator modernization, the largest in the world, going on the 9 months prior to 9/11, which would have given a group of operatives immediate access to the core columns and beams in the building, because the elevator hoistways are immediately surrounded by them. Ace Elevator had this contract, and they came out of nowhere 9 months before 9/11 to get this contract and somehow magically supersede Otis Elevator, who had installed the elevators originally and maintained them for a number of decades. So we want an investigation of Ace Elevator, whose employees fled instead of staying to help the firefighters rescue the victims using the elevator cabs, which they are experts in running. So there's an investigation there. There's the financial incentives also, in addition to the massive profits by Halliburton, Cheney's company, in Afghanistan and Iraq, and of course all of the defense contracting agencies. We have financial crimes exposed by James Corbett of the Corbett Report in his documentary 9/11 Trillions, Follow the Money, where he exposes, for instance, the bonds that were due on September 11th, curiously, that were used, billions and billions of dollars, these bonds, to bring down the Soviet Union. So they went into debt to fund that project, and magically the towers went down and the records with them. A lot of records went down. on 9/11, including the Securities and Exchange Commission, which lost thousands of, well, hundreds of folders related to thousands of documents in the investigation of major Wall Street companies like Enron and WorldCom. Those efforts, which were huge spider webs of corruption in the U.S. financial industry, those cases were destroyed. So there's a lot. And so how high does this go up the chain? Certainly, according to the 9/11 truth researchers, Cheney, some suggest Bush may or may not have been involved, probably not. And that's just, well, clearly above them. You have foreign influence, international corruption in the banking system that was almost certainly behind all of this. But we start with the technical evidence, and because that is irrefutable, it's not speculation, and it has to be dealt with by the human mind. You can't see it and then not see it. So people have to do something.
You know, a couple things that I remember come to mind. Donald Rumsfeld, I believe, gave a speech just the day before talking about, I think, wasn't it billions or trillions of dollars that were unaccounted for? On September 11th, he had given some type of speech.
$2.3 trillion announced the day before, like you said, that was unaccountable for in the Pentagon budget over the decades. And curiously, he gave this the day before 9/11, because the next day, nobody talked about it. It was like off the record. And we've got a $48 billion increase in the Pentagon budget due to the global war on terrorism that had to be fought now all around the world. You're either with us or you're with the terrorists. Right. So divide and conquer. And that's what they did.
Why do you think that with all the first responders that were, and you read a lot of those quotes and you talked about all those people, that no one could ever get, you know, I mean, because today everything, you know, every little thing goes before Congress. We want to hear from these people and that people. And, you know, recently they just had on, you know, Mark Zuckerberg and all the people with social media talking about the effects it's had, especially on children and young girls today. Why didn't any of these people ever get to speak, or did they, before Congress to give, hey, this is not what you said happened, is not what happened?
Well, the 9/11 Commission didn't interview a whole number of people, including those who I quoted. They did not want anybody to know that this was a controlled demolition. In fact, Philip Zelikow, the director of the 9/11, executive director of the 9/11 Commission, had outlined the 9/11 Commission report before any of the 9/11 commissioners ever met. He did his best to control the questions that they asked and had complete autonomy over what was written in the actual report, such that the 9/11 commissioner's attorney, John Farmer, said that there was a decision at some point not to tell the people the truth about 9/11. It was almost entirely untrue. The lawyer for the 9/11 Commission, Max Cleland, resigned from the 9/11 Commission, citing, this is a national scandal. The investigation has been compromised. By the way, Philip Zelikow earned his PhD in what? The creation and maintenance of public myth. Wow. You can't make this stuff up.
And there's just so many people today that just take just for fact everything that they hear on television, you know, from our mainstream media, that it's just the truth, or, you know, they leave so many things out. And I mean, this goes all the way back. Obviously, you know, I know that in doing research, George H.W. Bush's father, I believe Franklin Bush, was involved with the Nazis back in World War II. George H.W. Bush was involved, quote unquote, per se, with several people that fateful day back in November of 1963 when the President of the United States was, you know, murdered. And then this here, and it's just so easy to, you know, okay, we'll just believe, you know, they want everybody. I guess they just think that the public is stupid.
Mm-hmm. Well, and to some extent, they're right. The people are asleep. We've been brainwashed.
Yeah.
We're not given the truth by the media. We're giving a lot of lies, and we've got to wake them up, Michael. And that's why I am here today. And unfortunately, I have a little emergency I have to attend to. I've just been told.
That's
so
okay.
My apologies, but thank you so much for having us on for this important series. I hope everybody gets the word out. Share the post with your friends.
Absolutely. And I just want to, you know, thank you again for coming on, and I look forward to having you back on soon for part 4, where we can share other information about other false flags that we've talked about. So I really appreciate your time again today, and my best to your wife, Gail. Thank you, Richard.
Thank you so much, Mike.
All right. Talk to you soon.